Good morning. I have to apologize with all of you for my impossibility to be with you this morning. Unfortunately, circumstances will prevent me from coming, and so I asked to the organizer to have the privilege to present to you a very, very short summary of the points that I want to submit to you in this few pages concerning the story and the history of the conclave and the election of the Bishop of Rome, and some possible uh, solutions that might come to the front of the scene in front of new problems that may raise in the discussion. As we be aware of, I will go very quickly through the historical patches that I suppose are very known to you. As you are know, the election of a Bishop of Rome is not made by the cardinal and conclaves in the beginning, of course. A peculiar situation of the Church of Rome is marking the first century of its history. The succession to the to Peter as Bishop of Rome in the Church of Peter and Paul, that is another problem, is made in the very beginning through a mechanism that is very complicated because, technically speaking, it is a designatio. Name the Pope when he is fragile and dying, appoints the successor, and usually it is his archdeacon that will take his position. So it's a sort of appointment of an archdeacon as coadjutor cum iure successionis that comes as a moment in which the continuation of the throne of Peter is guaranteed in the Church of Rome. Why the archdeacon? Because the Church of Rome has an imprinting much more similar to the synagogue with a two level system, and so the bishop and archdeacons are the real ruler of the zone of the Church of Rome, and the priests are more dedicated to small community. I said a double side because in the Church of Rome there is the sense that the system of the designatio is by no way in contradiction with the general rule that says that the bishop must be elected by the clergy and the people. So this history says is probably a trace of the fact that the designatio is submitted to a sort of acclamation of the new elected bishop, and so the participation to this ritual of the axios of the new elected bishop is taking the place of the election. More and more, what happens is that the moment of the inthronization of the new Bishop of Rome is a moment of conflict. And so, one of the problems that the Church of Rome has to solve, as many other churches, is how to regulate conflictual elections in which two candidates are elected. Now, in the encyclopedias and in the handbooks, you will find sometimes the use of pope and anti-pope to describe the two ones. But in practice, during the real life of the community, this is much more complicated than a simple definition. What happens in the Council of 499 is that for the first time a regulation comes to provide orientation for an election that is much more normal than in the previous century. And so the principle that the new Bishop of Rome must be chosen and acclamated by a majority is something that will mark this turning point. We are speaking, to be clear, not of a bishop transferred to another diocese to Rome. This will happen only after 882. But for 9th century, the new Bishop of Rome is a priest or a deacon that is ordained as a bishop for the occasion and confirmed by the Emperor of Byzantium. Both election, consecration, have confirmation of the Christian emperor are part of a ritual that is not at all capable to solve the problem of conflicted elections. Mostly after the formation of a papal duchy, a temporal power of the Pope, the revolt and the interest of families and powers in the territory dominated by the Pope are coming more and more important, and not always the election is undisputed, or dispute are solved only in one moment. The legend of the so-called Iron Century, the 9th, 10th century, the moment in which the most complicated situation is there, covers the fact that it comes very quickly after the decision to appoint bishops coming from other churches to the throne of Peter, namely the change of the name. The fact that the new elected pope decided to be called with the name of the saints of the Church of Rome. So not to preserve his baptismal name, but coming into the service of the Church of Peter, taking a name that exists in the list of the previous bishops of Rome, or as they are called from the 4th century on popes. The first attempt that we see between the 9th and 11th century is to come to a reform of the election to make it more stable through a reform of the elected. So to the effort to find a person that could guarantee the respect, a person imposed by the emperor, a person imposed by the army, a person that will not give scandal, or that can have a so profound link with the great families of Rome to prevent the other from competing with him. But the solution that will come with the Gregorian reform in the 11th century is not to reform the elected, but to reform the electors. And so in 1059, in the council decree in nomine Domini, comes the decision that will place a first piece of the great mosaic that we now call the conclave, namely the fact that the electors are limited to a small number of people marked with a strange adjective, cardinals, that are the bishops of the little number of dioceses around Rome, electing the new bishop of Rome. The reform of the electors through the limitation to the cardinals, that will become sooner, that is the famous article of Stefan Kuttner on this, and in Munich is proper to quote him. The limitation to the cardinals does not work very much, as we will see, or you can see in all the normative changes in the election of the Bishop of Rome. Every provision in the first moment does not work very much. And so even the limitation to the cardinals does not work very properly. And only after a few elections, canons and reception ceremonies will give a certain number of election undisputed among the cardinals. And when we speak about the cardinals now, we are speaking something between half a dozen, or a little more number of electors. If the rule of the majority was established in 499, only in 1179 the council decided to establish through a conciliar act the need of a very qualified majority. 2/3 majority of the electors is the qualified majority for the most important decisions in canon law. It is very understandable that this must be applied to the election of the Bishop of Rome. But even this is not enough. The elector himself tries to find a better solution. One is to escape from the cathedral into a monastery and to close themselves inside the monastery in 1198. More effectively in 1241, the senator of Rome Matteo Rossini put the few cardinals surviving into a jail in order to ask them to provide to the election of the bishop in the shortest time. The few cardinals are the survivors because the emperor kidnapped some of the members of the college coming from Genoa to Rome a few weeks before. And so the election of Celestine IV is made into this condition of torture. One of the cardinal dies because of the hunger that he suffered. The elected dies into 2 weeks. And so the idea of leaving to the spontaneous system of capturing the cardinal, the way of accelerating the election is not working. The Bishop of Viterbo, where the college tried to survive, escaping from Rome, made something that is a bit more gentle, namely, they walled up the doors of the episcopal palace in 1269, and only in 1274, less than 1 century before the two-third majority, that the decree Ubi Periculum decided that the cardinal must be closed inside a palace, inside a building, in order to come up to a quick decision in the election of the Pope, and they must be treated like people into penance. The conclave at this point is more or less decided in some of its aspects. Two-third majority election of the cardinals by the cardinals, closure of the doors, but this doesn't mean that will work. I will not take you too much on the 1378 election of one pope, then another opposite pope, then a third pope, in order to design to replace all the other one, the Western Schism, that says that the solution is not into the rules and into the norms. And at the end of this crisis, a non-conclave, the election in the council, ordered by Sigismund, by nation and not by the cardinals, will restart the dynasty of the papacy through the conclave that will work to a certain extent unchallenged for a while. Unchallenged because Luther does not put into discussion the election of the Pope. Only a satirical novel of Gregorio Leti made this. And for this reason, the Council of Trent did not touch the point of the election of the Pope, not being disputed by the enemies of the Roman Catholic papacy. And so the rules remained the same, even with the Baroque definition of Gregory XV, that in 1621-1622 made a certain number of corrections to the election, introducing liturgy and norms that will offer the Baroque liturgy that now we know on the conclave. When we speak about the conclave, don't think to a conclave in the Ancien Regime that is a conclave that must be independent from civil power. On the contrary, the Catholic crowns as a role and a power in the election of the Pope. They have their own cardinals into the college, and the college will vote according to their will. They will vote with different systems. One is the scrutiny, the other is the so-called accessum, the fact that you can change the vote in your second vote in the same day. Now it's substituted, but with scrutiny one after the other. And the things will not change until the French Revolution. The modern era and the 19th century, the century in which all the popes are elected into the Quirinal Palace, is a century in which fear is the real legislator. for Pope Gregory, for Pius IX more specifically. The problem is how to regulate the election of the Pope in a context in which the enemies of the Church may come and disrupt the institutional stability of Roman Catholicism. And for this reason, the legislation, mostly of Pius IX, gives the possibility of an election into a very real emergency. The three cardinals that goes to detect and certificate the death of the Pope are allowed to go immediately to the election without calling the other cardinals and electing with a two-third majority a new Pope if needed. And the secret, too, is made in order to cover the election and to protect the electors from the risk of interference that for Pius IX may come from the Italian who deprived him of his temporal power and his city, from the friends of Garibaldi and Mazzini, from the people that is considered the best enemy of the church. Is in the election of his successor that is made in Rome and not in Malta, as it was supposed to be happen in case of danger. In the election of Leo XIII, the vote per accessum is abolished, and so the two scrutiny comes to the surface of the regulation, and mostly the real change happened after 1903. In 1903, at the election after Leo XIII, the Emperor of Austria used his old power of vetoing a candidate, and so he prevented the election of Cardinal Rampolla. The scandal was immense into the conclave, but actually the veto was effective. Rampolla was not elected, and it was Pius X that was not at all inclined to accept that, indeed accepted the election to the papacy and issue a constitution preventing from this point on whatever type of veto or interference of secular power, being they Catholic or not. It is after this rules that the conclave has most of the characteristics that we now know in the past 125 years, namely a conclave made under the secret, made inside the Vatican borders, because there is no other place in which the papacy can have the independence that it has in its own prison until 1929 state, after the Lateran Pacts of 1929, made by the cardinals coming to Rome, starting to vote after 9 days of mourning on the past Pope, and with a two-third majority. I will not take your time for disputing with you about the two-third plus one introduced by Pius IX, two-third minus one introduced by two-third without the plus one of John the 23rd, the two-third suspended after 1 month of John Paul II, the two-third re-established even after 1 month by Ratzinger. The idea of the majority is one point that, in my view, is not so central in this case. What is central is the reforms of Paul VI. In 1970, Paul VI, with Incravescentem Etatem, decided that the cardinals with more than 8 years will not participate into the conclave, but just into the congregations before the conclave, the Novendiali. It is a disruptive decisions that will change the electors after 1,000 years. And this will exclude some of the enemies of Paul VI, but mostly it will exclude in this moment 16 after of 120 cardinal electors. The number of cardinals will be limited at the end of the 16th century to 70, then moved to 77 by John the 23rd, and 120 by Paul VI. The rules of the 8 years old will give to the Pope the possibility to appoint a great number of cardinals. Even in a few years, A pope can appoint more than the majority of the cardinals. We know, and you remember maybe the figures of Pope Francis: 108 out of 133 electors are appointed by Bergoglio himself. And the legislation Romano Pontificie Legendo in 1975 defines this effect of the exclusion of the over 80 years old Pope. Romano Pontificie Legendo is one of the many constitutions that from the 19th century on are issued in order to give to the College of the Cardinal fresh rules and to help them, not asking them to find somewhere complicated stories concerning the procedure, but having very clearly in only one booklet all what is needed. And these are the rules that will go to the two election of 1978, lasting one day, like Leo the 14th, the other election of Wojtyla, 2 nights, because the favorite Cardinal Siri will go very close to the majority of the two-third, but not beyond this. And this made his candidature disappear after the second night and the candidature of Wojtyla going up at this point very, very quickly. As I said, John Paul II made, as it was normal, a constitution concerning the conclave, simply without a great change, but only with minor correction, the aliquibus and normas non nullas in 2007 and 2013, simply to adapt the rules concerning the two-third majority that must be implemented in any case, and what happens in the case of resignation, being Pope Ratzinger an involuntary legislator of how the resignation must take place and what the emeritus Bishop of Rome must behave. Ratzinger, as defined, deciding to live inside the temporal power of the successor, a practice that will probably remain the same for the future. Pope Francis did not change the rules of the conclave at all. The same rules working for the election of Bergoglio in 2013 are the same that elected Pope Leo XIV in 2025. Rules in which there are a few problems that I'd like to submit to you that, in my view, makes some adaptation to the rules necessary or at least useful. On one side, there is a point, extrinsic one, but not so stupid, namely the fact that in this moment, the alignment of the age in which you become too old in the Roman Catholic Church are very different. If you're a bishop, you become too old at 75. If you're a prefect, you become too old at 75. But as a lector, you will come too old at 8 years old. So to come to a better readjustment of this, that will take into consideration the fact that the geriatric medicine development are creating a longer life for many people, must reconsider also this point. There is another aspect that is concerning the fact that, thanks to the survival of people beyond 80 in the most normal case for 10 years or even more, makes the fact that the number of non-electors is now very large. And so the general congregations with so many non-electors is an aspect that must be considered. Because the rules of the conclave are very strict in protecting the electors from external influences. And when you become a non elector, you are an external influence, one way or another. And so, one of the things that must be considered is if this fact that the cardinals will meet for 9 days in a sort of general assembly of 200 people, and for 1 day and a half for electing the popes, create the sense that once that they are alone, they have already exploited all the time for patience, reflection, and consideration concerning the decision. The fact that the Pope must be elected in 1 day is becoming, in the past 50 years, a sort of tradition, with the exception of Wojtyla, that is not a bad case. And so there is no need to consider the pressure on the cardinals to come as much as possible to a quick and a short election, the only point to be considered. But there is also another aspect much more important. The reduction of the number of ballots per day could be a way to create a less sense of necessity of coming very, very quickly to an end, and more time for a discussion among the cardinals, not simply for making an impression of the candidate, but having some knowledge of the candidate. But there is something more. Now, the right of the conclave, that is the same of Gregory XV, says that in the moment in which a candidate goes beyond the two-third majority after the scrutiny, the dean asks to him, acceptasne electionem canonice factam, do you accept your election made according to the canon law? And the candidate, the elected Pope, has to say accetto or non accetto, I accept or I do not. Cardinal Parolin wrote a preface to a surprising book that has something to say about Leo XIV, that's actually a very unknown person in this moment. Cardinal Parolin says that when he himself went in front of Cardinal Prevost asking him acceptasne, everybody was waiting for the answer, because probably somebody thought that he could have said non accetto. And in this moment in which accusations, allusions, fake news, revelations can compromise the prestige of a person, to leave to him much time to reflect on the consequences of his accetto is not a bad situation. We have seen both in the election of Pope Francis and the election of Leo XIV that a few moments after the election, accusations came. In the case of Bergoglio, the idea that he was too lenient toward the military regime in Argentina against Bob Prevost, the fact that being Bishop of Chiclayo, he has not been strong enough against the case of pedophilia. But this fact that to leave more time to the election and more time to the elected could be a way to deprive the media system of the possibility of launching a breaking news after the second or the third black smoke. The church is divided. The new pope is not been elected. Of course, the church has many divisions and quarrels and problems. The ministry of Peter is exactly there for this reason, to create unity. And if the election can be done in a bit more time and less pressure, this could be a good result. The sense of interest around the conclave in a society in which the social media have made everything public is, as we have seen also recently, very intense. The media are attracted by this process in which there is at least, thanks God, some secret. But the point for the Roman Catholic Church, is to come to an election canonice factam, with the sense, as Cardinal Ratzinger once described very precisely in a TV interview, that the cardinals there are not trying to guess and to bet what the Holy Spirit wants, but they are there to proceed with their consciences and hoping that the light of the Spirit may drive their ends. Thank you very much, and again, my apologies for not being with you.